Hello, welcome again to our weekly Parsha Shiur of the comment with the commentary of the Alshich HaKadosh, and we're up to the Parsha of Mishpatim, which I can't remember exactly if this is the Parsha with the most mitzvahs in it, but I think I'm right. 53, if my memory serves me well, which is a lot of mitzvahs, a lot of themes which I could have chosen to focus on, or chosen to dip into the Alshich, allow him to focus on, I should say. And but I found one which I think you will find very interesting indeed. I will share the screen as normal for a few moments, so you can take a screenshot, pause, and take a screenshot, or maybe if you want to get your Chumash out and look at it inside, would probably be a good idea. But anyway, this week's shiur is sponsored for the Aliyah of the Neshama of Shlomi Zalman ben Eliyahu. Shlomi Zalman ben Eliyahu. His neshama should have an aliyah. And again, as we always say, if you'd like to have this Alshich shiur sponsored for the aliyah of the neshama of the dear one, or to celebrate a simcha, then simply send me an email to yy@rabbiyyy.com, yy@rabbiyyy.com, and we'll be more than happy to dedicate this shiur to the memory or to the for the celebration that you are participating in or created in your own family. Okay, so that is the first bit out of the way. So the parsha that we're going to look at, so many mitzvahs, but there's one bit that I fell, and I have to tell you, after a lifetime of learning the Alshich, I don't remember actually having seen this bit before, which is more than possible. I should tell you that this is the one with the Alshich which I use in our shiur. I think it's my 6th, something like that. I wear them. I wear them out, and normally the side of the pages, as you can see there, are my notes. Can you see my little hand scribbly notes there? And so that allows me to know that I've been there before. But as this is, as I say, my 6th, it might be in one of my earlier editions. I did read this and I've forgotten. I can't remember. But what we're about to learn together, I think, is crucially important. And it's a very, very much a theme of interpersonal relationships, societal relationships, and it's worthy of some serious attention. So, if you have a Chumash, just to let you know, we're looking at chapter 22 in Shmois. That's Kof Beis, and we are at Pasuk Kof. We'll do Kof Aleph, Kof Beis, and Kof Gimel. And I'll share the screen with you now. We'll read it through, and then I'll let the Alshich do the talking. So, and I'll share the screen. And when I share the screen, I bring up the psukim that we're going to be looking at. I put it in the English as well. The reason I put it in the English is quite simply because some words don't translate very well, or don't translate at all, as I said in my last week's Hamadiyah column. Let's remind ourselves what we're talking about here. So it says the following: Beger loisa'ina. Somebody who became Jewish, a convert, loisa'ina. The same word as annoyes devoring, to upset the again. I couldn't think of a good English word. The Yiddish word's easy, chepper. To let's see. Let's look over at the English side, because I'm struggling here. How do they translate this? I'm looking at taunt. Maybe taunt and chepper don't work. Okay, something like that. Do not provoke. Do not upset this fellow who's a convert, or this lady's a convert. Another word, lachatz is to oppress. Because you were converts, you yourself were strangers and converts to the land of Israel. The Alshich will expand on that, but that seems to be really quite straightforward. Why should you treat anybody any different to you would like to be treated yourself? That's a famous Jewish saying. Hillel says, don't do to other people what will be repulsive to you. And as what it would be repulsive to you would be appropriate to you, because as we'll see in the Alshich, he's going to point out there was a time when you were just as bad as them. Okay, so this non-Jewish person worshipped idols, but so did we in Egypt. Where do you get off your high horse of being so superior? That's the first bit. However, the Alshich is going to link that crucially and critically to what comes next, because we have a ger, and then it says, let's look at the next pasuk. In Kof Aleph, it says, Kol almona v'yosam. All almona, widows, v'yosam, and orphans, lois sa'anun. Do not sa'anun. Here's another word. It means to upset. Im ana sa'ana, if you do upset them. Ki im tzoek yitzak, if they cry out, elai to me, shama eshma, I will certainly hear them. Tzak, his cry. And then what comes next is very frightening. The chora api, and I'll be very angry. Haragti eskem, and I will kill you, plural, all of you who are engaged in this terrible behavior of oppressing these three categories of people. The chora through the sword, and your wives will become widows, and your children will become orphaned. That's what we're going to look at tonight through the eyes of the Alshich HaKadosh. Okay? So I'll keep the screen up for just a little more, a few seconds. If you're listening to this driving in the car, it'd be hard for you to see, but maybe if I do have it in front of you, it'll be much easier for me to draw your attention to a couple of things. Notice that it says in the second pasuk, Kol almona, all almonas. Why did it say kol? Just say an almona and a yosem and an orphan you should not upset. But the next pasuk, it seems to almost like have a stammer. Im ana to ana. If you upset. I saw him instead of them. Ki im tzoek yitzak. If you make them cry out, and doesn't say tzoek, get them to cry out, but tzoek yitzak, certainly get them to cry out. To me, shamat eshva, I will certainly hear. Double expressions, 3 double expressions in a row. That's rather interesting, isn't it? Okay, so if you want to take a screenshot, pause, and then take a screenshot, and then pause, and then open it again, you'll be able to follow along. I'll stop sharing, and then we're back to my study. And I want to read what the Alshich says. Now, the Alshich, let me tell you, it says, often, that's not true. He actually seldom quotes other commentators. But if he's going to quote other commentators, the ones he most commonly quotes is Rashi, whom he often disagrees with, or rather disagrees with the emphasis that Rashi, or Rashi's approach. The Ramban, also a fellow Sephardi Jew who lived in Spain, earlier period, of course, or I should say the Spanish mainland. And the other one that he quotes is the Rambam, often sometimes Moreh HaNevuchim. I can't remember if he quotes too many others, but those are certainly, and it's interesting that those are the ones that you choose, but we won't stay too long on that, except to tell you I'm going to set up what the Alshich has to say. I'll have to very soon direct you to the Ramban. But as saying, having now established that the Alshich himself quotes the Ramban, that would seem a fair enough thing to do. Okay, so again, the Alshich says the following thing. Al Tamer no Yisrael. The Hashem is giving a piece of advice to the Jewish people and saying, El kol kach me'usa hi avodah zarah. Jewish people should not take the following perspective. They shouldn't say to themselves, Hashem hates idolatry, as indeed he does. But al yasham hamagana es mi sha'ovad es echad shenizgar, l'omer lo etzmal avodah zarah. You mustn't turn around to somebody who wasn't Jewish up until recently, and therefore engage in all these idolatrous practices that the Torah finds so offensive, and say, oh, that's what you were like. Why not? So the Alshich says it slightly differently. Establish that. It says, do not oppress or cheper, provoke a convert. She oinostavar, which is verbal oppression. Because what will come from that, the next stage, and don't oppress him. Now here's a very important idea. The language of hate, and there is a language of hate, is essential to go on to justify or motivate the actions of hate. If you think for a second about all the words that people use in hate speech to define other people, the N-word, obviously is used to define a whole category of human beings as being, not really human beings. In fact, there's an incredible story. After the Second World War, the American forces managed to capture somebody who was called Stangl, Franz Stangl. Yemach Shemoy, as they say. You may not have heard of him. He was the commandant of Treblinka. He was interrogated by American officers, and at one point in the interrogation, they asked him the following question. You see, Treblinka was different to Auschwitz. Auschwitz, of course, was a concentration and a death camp, but some people are allowed to survive as slave laborers for a certain amount of time. And because there was labor to be done in Auschwitz, there was an armaments factory in Auschwitz, there was a salt mine outside, there was things to do which needed slave labor to perform those tasks. However, interestingly, in Treblinka, or interestingly is the wrong word, appallingly in Treblinka, there was nothing except killing Jews. And yet, before the Jews were actually sent to their death, they were made to perform back-breaking work, etc. So they were asked, this evil man, Franz Stangl, was asked, why, as the Jews were scheduled to be killed in any case, why should they have to perform these back-breaking tasks for no purpose, just breaking rocks and so on and so forth? The toilet facilities were woefully inadequate, and permission to use them was routinely refused. So the Jews became covered in their own excrement and their own urine. They stank, they looked horrible, they were starved and looking at walking skeletons or walking scarecrows. Why were they treated like that if they're going to be killed anyway? And this is what Stangl replied. He said, in order to condition those who had to carry out the policies, to make it possible for them to do what they had to do. Interesting. You see, even Nazis had to see Jews as not being human beings like they were. So they were Übermenschen, supermen, and Jews were Untermenschen, subhuman. You have to see another human being as not being you in order to treat them badly, which is why so commonly in the language of hate, you substitute another person as being a person, as being a something else. And in our world, I'm afraid that's very common. Hasidim, some Hasidim, I should say, will say, Litvakas. That's my lot. Yeshiva men, Litvakas. Litvakas, my lot will say, Hasidim. You have to have a designation. You have to have usually a nickname, which defines somebody in a negative way to allow you to go on to the next stage, which is oppress them. And that's what it says here. You should not, with regards to a gerlis, that's verbal oppression, nicknames and all that sort of stuff, and say to them, look at that, you were a guy yesterday and you worship Avodah Zarah, to change them from the category that you belong to, for then you can go on to the next stage, don't oppress, because that follows as surely as night and day follow each other. It's verbal oppression, verbal designation, removal of status as being a human being, the same as you are, and that leads to you to be able to physically abuse them. So let me read a little bit more of the Alshich, because this is very, very brilliantly observed. He says, and in order that you shouldn't do that, the Pasuk says, do not verbally abuse them, and then the next expression, and do not oppress. And then it says, why? Because you also or Gerim in the land of Egypt. And listen to this bit. You want to see him as being a substandard inferior because he was previously a worshipper of idols, and so were you, Cloud and Stroll. When I took you out from Egypt, as the Medrash famously says, the Egyptians' angel chased after the fleeing Jews and complained to God, it's not fair that my people should suffer and your people should escape. My people worship idols, I admit it, so did yours. And yet, Hashem saw fit and saw fitness within them, saw potential within them to ignore the past. Here's an important rule. Jews are not or should not be interested in the past. We should be, I'm talking personally, we should be interested in the present and the future. I once at a wedding in Manchester, it was a wedding actually of a Balchu and actually a Garish, and I was sitting at a very, very prestigious rabbi's table, and I was asked to speak. And I got to speak, and after I gave whatever speech I gave to the Chosn and Kala, I then said, and I want to give you a bracha. you should never be content. You should never be content. When I returned to sit at my table, one of the big Rabbonim, and all the Rabbonim there could, as they say, learn me under the table, said, what's a blessing? Was that? It sounded more like a curse. And all the other Rosh Yeshiva, etc., were there, fell on him like the proverbial ton of bricks, from all sorts of sources, Hasidic and non-Hasidic, Musar, etc., saying that that's precisely the position a Jew should occupy. We should never be content with what we are. We should want to move forward. And the fact we were is an irrelevant if it's been superseded by who we are, if we move forward. So Avram Avinu came from a family of Avodah Zarah, and he became Avram Avinu. All the great imams, the mothers of the Jewish people, all came from horrible family backgrounds, and look who they became. Klal Yisrael is almost an unending story of people who came from really the sort of background you would never expect any human potential from, and look who they became. And that's the story of the Jewish people. Well, if that's our story, if that's the story of the Jewish people, why don't we apply it to other people who've gone through the exact same story? So how can you possibly turn around and say to somebody who's converted to Judaism, a couple of months ago you were worshipping idols? If that, according to that logic, well, there should be no Jewish people. Hashem should, as you're rejecting him or her, Hashem should have rejected us. So he says, B'sham Nizgairasim, because in Egypt, that's why we became Jews. That's where we changed and transformed ourselves through the whole Exodus process. So how on earth do you come to be cruel to this person? And since God, and look, God did not reject you. And God was not repelled and repulsed by you because you worshipped idols. And actually went on to give you his Torah at Mount Sinai 7 weeks later. So you should not be disparaging and horrible to somebody else who's going through the same process. As he is, you are, or you were. The mitzvah, after all, is v'hafta l'recha kamaika. That's not too difficult to love somebody as you would love yourself. That's not too difficult a metaphor, even though it's a positive. It's not too difficult a metaphor to apply in this particular case. And that is that you are literally like him. You, the Jewish people, there was a time in Egypt where you worshipped idols the same as they did. Because you should know that the Jewish perspective is that a non-Jewish person becomes Jewish is considered literally to be a new human being. Halachically, to such an extent, the Torah would say that if it was a mother and a son, or a father and a daughter, who converted at the same time, as far as the Torah is concerned, the first evolution of Torah law, the Deraisa, they could marry each other. They're two new human beings. The rabbis prohibited it, but you can see how far the Torah views this person as being a completely new human being if he can marry his genetic mother. So that's the first thing. But the interesting bit that I find in the Alshich is what comes next, because the Alshich here is now going on to contrast and examine the interconnectivity between the first category of person you're not allowed to oppress and the next category, which is, as we read on, if you remember before, the almona, the widow, and the orphan. Now, at this point, that's why I have to tell you about the Ramban. You see, there is, I remember many years ago, one of my books is called On the Derech, Answers to Questions That Challenge Jewish Minds. And I gathered together over years very good questions that were asked of me by young people, generally young people, but occasionally a couple of Rabbonim as well, who were unable to find good, satisfying answers. And I have to tell you, there's nothing I like more in the world than a question that I get I don't know the answer to. As it says in Pirkei Avos, train yourself to say, I don't understand. Well, I have to tell you, I find that very easy, because when I don't know, when somebody asks me and I say I don't know, I get very excited, because I don't know is obviously simultaneously a statement of I can find out. It's an invitation to go and look at something you don't know the answer to, which is always very exciting. So I quite like I don't know. So interestingly, somebody once asked me, so those 21 genuine questions became a book with 21 very interesting answers. But one of the questions that didn't make it into the book because it was asked afterwards was an interesting one. And a lady who was divorced said to me, the Torah prohibits speaking in a detrimental way to a convert or to an almana or to an orphan. But what about me? I'm a divorcee. What about a divorcee? Interesting. Very interesting question. For that, I have to take you to the Ramban. So in the Ramban, and this you'll find in the Seder of Kedoshim, and the Seder in Kedoshim says the following thing: V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, right at the beginning, incidentally. V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, Hashem says to Moshe, following Daber el Kol. The Lord can't say it. Try again. Daber el Kol adas b'nei Yisrael. This is what we say to the entire congregation of Jewish people. But Martin and say to them, Kedoshim to you should be holy. Kikodesh ani Hashem Elokeichem. Because I, the Lord your God, am holy. What does it mean to be holy? It's very nice to say it. You should be holy. Well, what does that mean? Rashi, quoting the Medrash, says the following thing: Kedoshim tiyu have perushim min harayos umin avera. Separate yourself from that which is forbidden and from sexual immorality. He says that automatically leads to holiness. The Ramban here says the source that Rashi is quoting, Rashi quotes selectively. He's edited it. It doesn't say that you should separate yourself from that which is forbidden, but separate yourself from also that which is permissible. And this leads the Ramban to say one of the most famous things that he says of all, in all his commentaries on the Chumash, and indeed throughout all of his writings. The Ramban says it's perfectly possible to keep all of the letter of the law, all of the laws of the Torah, and not only that, keep them meticulously. And you are always extremely rigorous in making sure that the meat you buy has got the very best texture, and that the wine you buy has got 3 heshes, so on and so forth. You can do that and still spend the whole day eating and drinking and be a very base person, having checked all of the Torah's halachic requirements. As my Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Gurbitz, pointed out once in one of his shiurim, the mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, are a bit like rungs in the ladder, like steps in a ladder. Nobody wants to stand in a ladder. The purpose of a ladder is to take you somewhere else. The mitzvahs are the means. They mean the means in order to get to another place. But that's the purpose. The mitzvahs are there to transform you and turn you into a different sort of person, to take you to a different place. Therefore, when the Torah here says you should be holy, it doesn't just mean separate yourself from that which is forbidden, but also that which is permissible. So says the Ramban. And then, carrying on his analogy, he gives lots of examples of people who are not offending the letter of the Torah, the letter of the law of the Torah, but the spirit of the law, the ambition of the law, the address that the law wishes you to reach, that the Torah would certainly object to. Intriguingly, he says the following rule, and maybe I'll read this a little bit to you. He says, "B'zeh derech haTorah, it's the way of the Torah, lifroit v'lichlo b'kiyetz b'zeh." For the Torah to give a couple of examples, in actual fact, usually 3 examples, and then at the end, when it gives the 3 examples, the Torah will say what these 3 examples of what you're not allowed to do are meant to guide you towards, what conclusion as a human being it wants you to achieve. So, for example, he says, and I'll read this bit here, he says, Ki achri atzaras parati adinim b'kol ma'aseh ma'aseh b'nei adam. When the Torah goes into business law, which it says in Devorim chapter 4 Yud Ches, and it tells you things you're not allowed to do as a businessman or a businesswoman, and then it says lo signov, don't steal, lo sigzo, another type of stealing, lo sa'ina, and don't oppress people with, don't speak about them nastily in business. Bashar says, etc. Omer b'klal b'sisa yoshev. After it says that, gives that list, it then says, and you should do that which is straight and good. So we get 3 or more examples of what the Torah says is forbidden, and then at the end of it, there is a summation, and you should do that which is straight and good. And again, you would say, surely if I'm not stealing as a businessman, cheating, swindling, I'm paying my taxes, etc., I'm automatically doing that which is straight and good. To which the Ramban says, no, you can, as it were, check the boxes, but never achieve what the boxes want you to achieve. You can be a cheat, a swindler. You will not cheat. You will not be a swindler. You will not be a ganav, whatever other categories, and still not do in business what the Torah expects of you as a Jew. Or if you think about the law of the Nazir, somebody wants to reach a high spiritual level, and takes on for usually a short period of time a very strict regime upon himself. The Torah says you must not drink anything, no wine, nothing from the grape. You must become drunk. The Nazir story follows after the woman who committed adultery with Saita, which Rashi says there she could only have done that if she became drunk. Which I'm afraid in the 21st century sounds, I hate anyway to sound even slightly critical of Rashi. I'm just saying that in Rashi's time, when the world was a better place morally and ethically, today the idea that it would only be alcoholic inebriation which would lead somebody to commit adultery is a little bit less than the common experience. But it says there, so therefore, in order for you to make sure it doesn't happen to you, you'll keep away from wine. You mustn't cut your hair to become a Nazir was usually a month. Your hair will grow, and you keep away from a dead body, the same sort of law as a kohen. The interesting thing is that if you look at the halacha, when this is discussed in the Gemara and fixed in the halacha, like the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, it says, because the Torah says anything that comes from the grape is forbidden to a Nazir. So wine is out, the grape juice is out, wine is out, brandy, which of course is a spirit distilled from wine, that's out. But it's only because the Torah makes it clear anything from the grape. Well, there's plenty of alcoholic beverages that do not come from the grape. There's whiskey, there's bourbon, there's gin, there's vodka, there's rum, and so on and so forth. It's a very, very long list. In fact, you could literally picture somebody with slightly long hair, who's never near a dead body, who's lying in the gutter, surrounded by the sick that he's thrown up, with a t-shirt saying, "I am a Nazir," and he's not offended the Torah law because he drank whiskey, or he drank gin, or vodka. But the Torah is telling you the specifics in order to lead you to the klal. Don't cheat, don't lie, don't swindle, and be a good businessman, be a Yoshua type. And then it says, you will keep away from wine, you will keep away from dead bodies, keep away from haircuts, and then it says, and you'll be holy to God. And here's again the ambition coming at the end of the list. In other words, the Ramban, which we're now going to see echoed in the words of the Alshich in a second, is telling you the following thing. And indeed, that's the answer to the question that young lady asked me. Why doesn't it say anywhere in the Torah that you should not oppress somebody who's a divorcee? That's male or female, by the way. They're vulnerable, just that women show their vulnerability more than men. Men are too proud, so they're not going to admit that they're in trouble. But whenever a person's in trouble, then the same laws apply here that apply to the almana, the ger, and the orphan, apply to other people as well. There's a cloud, but let me read to that to you in the Alshich, because here he's going to say some very interesting things. And let me just remind you of the double expression. The double expression when Hashem says, and if you do that, in honor to Anna. If you really upset them, I suppose I would translate, or upset them, it's a double expression. And they cry out to me, and I will listen. The double expression, let's see what we can make of that. Let me read to the Alshich here. First of all, it said, Kol Almana. It says, Kol Almana, all Almana. Why does it Kol? Here's a nice, interesting rule. In the Torah, it says Kol, it calls what's called a ribui. A ribui is that it includes something else apart from the thing that's being discussed in the Pasuk, Kol. And the Rambam says, it means Hu Omer Kol Hu Rabas Almana Oshir. That means you're not allowed to upset an almana, even if she's a rich woman. Her husband is a multimillionaire and sadly passed away, but he's left her with all sorts of, securities and bonds and trust funds and all sorts of stuff that I know the names of and don't know what they do, but she's got lots of money. She's secure, financially secure. Don't think that then, because of that you are allowed to engage in insensitivity because of her situation. You're not. And then he goes on to say, I missed it a little bit here. Because Shara has started as a Baal Tiska Lager were outside Akademis, sorry. And just ignore that bit for a second. And just like it says the Torah prohibits, and that's the connection between the ger, the posuk, the ger, and the almana and the yosem. Just like it says you're not allowed to remind him of his background. And imasrecho, then the posuk then goes on to say, and Hashem saying, I'm warning you, Baal tigram lizracha liyosem ba'almona toiva shoyis l'kol echad mehem l'dag al vidam es tsar lamoy. Don't, your sensitivity, your verbal sensitivity should be so acute that you don't mention to either an orphan or an almona their previous situation when they were happily married or happily a member of a family with a daddy or a mummy, whichever parent has died, God forbid both. Because mentioning their past will make them compare and contrast the happy times when they were a complete family with a mummy and a daddy, or the happy times when it was a couple and she had a husband or he had a wife. And now by mentioning that, you're bringing that to their attention and you're creating sadness and upset. So in the same way as it says, don't go back, don't reference back to the ger, well, that will upset him or her. Don't reference back to the history, the happy history, which will be compared and contrasted to the present of the almana, of the widow, or of the orphan. Then he says, why say kol, even if the woman is a rich lady, why? The inyan smikas, and the fact that it talks about the ger and it talks about the orphan and the widow. The inyan carful ino tzedakah, and it says a double expression of ino, of being upset, and tzedakah, and crying out. And the answer is, why does it say that? Maybe skip a little bit here. Ki inuim carful, because there are two types of upset that you're likely to give by speaking or being unkind towards an almona or a yosem, a widow or a yosem. One, ino shel kol adam. The insensitivity when somebody speaks to you that upsets you, that's just general. And two, shazoika kol echad asher chasar loy. In the case of the almona, and in the case of the orphan, you're pointing out to them when you've upset them that they don't have a mummy or a daddy to protect them, they don't have a husband or to protect them, or a wife to make them feel better, that they've been attacked. You've exposed them to that sensitivity. You've reminded them, as we said a few moments ago, of the fact that they are now, the Yiddish phrase is Ina Alein, on their own. For the widow, then in reminding her and shepherding her, which immediately everybody feels the pain of being shepherded, of being upset. But in her case, it also draws attention to the fact she's a widow. And maybe she started to forget. Maybe the healing had taken over, and she was really healing. But now you've reminded her of the fact that her husband is dead or his wife is dead. You've opened the wound again. So there's two things. There is a double whammy. There is the fact that you've upset her, and the upset immediately references in her mind or the orphan's mind, there's nobody there to make me feel better. I've lost my mummy and my daddy, I've lost my husband and my wife. So that's a double expression. So that's why it says twice, if you upset the almona, the widow, or the yosem, and then God will, and they cry out to me. And I hear both aspects of what you've done. Oz Mason the carful ino, and that's doubled up the pain that they felt. Well, Meretz Hain Loy Hoya Kamlini Vlog, and it's drawing attention to the fact if we weren't in our situation, he wouldn't have upset me like this because my husband would have stepped in and my dad would have stepped in. So you'll cause the little boy to cry for or little girl for the lack of their daddy. That the upset in the case of an almona and a yosem is an upset which is doubled, automatically doubled. The normal upset that anybody feels when somebody's upset them, and then the realization there's nobody to help me, to defend me, or make me feel better. Even if that is the case, not like in the case of the ger. In the case of the ger, somebody's actually attacking him. Hey, you used to be a guy, I used to. And then it will escalate from there. But even in the case of a ger too, if you upset them because of a lack of sensitivity of language, that's also, you're going to be in trouble about that. And if you, of course, you're doing it intentionally. Well, I mentioned this to my girls in seminary today, and one of them said, but inevitably upset people when you talk to them. I agree. In fact, because I speak to large audiences all the time, and maybe I'm doing this now, and it might be because I just talked about a divorcee, I've talked about a widow, I've talked about an orphan, and maybe somebody watching this shiur is one of those people, an orphan, a widow or widower, a divorcee, a ger, etc. Maybe you're getting upset, but I think the point is the person trying to upset you? And if he's not trying to upset you, should he or she have enough sensitivity to be careful in case that would upset you? But that doesn't preclude normal conversation or a shiur in Torah as we're doing now, because the Torah talks about everything, as Ben Bagbag says at the end of the 5th period, everything's in Torah. So that means, the Ten Commandments says don't commit adultery. Well, there might be somebody in the audience who's committing adultery. Shouldn't I mention that? The Ten Commandments says to neighbors, say, don't murder. Shouldn't I mention that? Maybe there's somebody who's having a tough time with the mother-in-law and thinking about it. You get the idea. It's the question. The point is, should the person? Is it reasonable to expect the person to be more sensitive? But you can't be sensitive to everybody, because some people are super sensitive, and anything you're going to say is going to upset them. And in fact, we know today that some people are desperate to be upset, so they do the old virtue signaling. Oh yes, that's terrible. That's not what we're talking about. But particularly if you intentionally upset somebody, that's really what it's talking about. So then he says it's a double expression. And the Yosem will also cry out, I'll take care of this. Now let's see what comes next. So what does Hashem say he's going to do? Hashem says, I'm going to haraktias, I'm going to kill you. Now listen to, and if you got your commission from, look at the words again. And it's an astonishing thing here, what the Alshich says. I think it's brilliant. Hashem says, I will be upset about this double offense that you've done. And I will kill you for this. And the Alshich says, just like the Ramban, and this isn't just about these 3 categories, it applies to everybody. It's double. They'll feel it more. That's where you get the double punishment. But certainly the idea of not upsetting somebody who's sensitive in an area like a divorcee, then that certainly is something which is prohibited. However, on the post of the Api, Hashem says, I'll be very angry with you for this, and I will kill you through the sword. And your wife will be almona, and your children will be yasamim. Well, of course they will. If you kill somebody with a sword, then automatically there will be. Why does it say that? Why does it have to say that? Remember, the rules looking at Alshich. There's nothing in the Torah that's there for extra. Why does it say, and I will kill you, and your wife will be an almona, and your children will be yasamim? Of course they will. And here the Alshich quotes the Mechilta. And the Mechilta says something which is even more scary. And it's something to bear in mind. The sensitivity that's required of us to be aware that we might be upsetting people is something we have to worry about a lot. And when we intentionally do it, Hashem says, you know what your punishment is going to be? I will kill you. And your wife will be an almana, and your children will be an orphan, which is obviously known as telling a specific thing. Your wife will be perpetually an almana, and your children will be perpetually yasamim. What does that mean? As the Gemara famously says, if somebody goes out to battle and is lost, unless there's any clear evidence or even the suspicion that he's been killed, the wife is frozen in a limbo state of not married, but not married. No husband there, but there's no evidence he's dead, so she becomes an aguna. She's stuck in a marriage, chained to a marriage to perhaps a dead person, but we've no evidence. So therefore she will be a widow forever. She can never we can never declare her free to marry somebody else, because maybe you're still alive. The children will be yasamim forever, because they can't claim their father's estate, because maybe he's still alive. Hashem is so upset and distressed by the sort of behavior that we've been describing, and the people you might upset, that could be the consequences. So this is something clearly to avoid. Sensitivity in how we speak. The Kotzker Rebbe was a very great Hasidic Rebbe, said, not everything that's thought should be said, not everything that's said should be written, or in my case, broadcast. And it's difficult. certainly, when you're speaking to a large audience, inevitably. I remember once in Manchester, I was speaking to a large shul, somewhere in Manchester, I won't say which, and I was talking about the parsha of the Ishis Fastur, the beautiful non-Jewish woman when the Jewish soldier goes out to battle, and as it were, it falls in love with her, as they say. And she's, of course, dressed herself up to be as attractive as possible so that she will be taken by a Jewish soldier. Then, again, it's back to her 3. The Torah says she has to, her beautiful dress that she's wearing has to be removed in samot shmata, replaced with samot shmata. The fingernails are all nicely manicured, grow, and eventually got a half moon of darkness underneath them, not so pretty. And her beautiful hair is shaved off. Because of course hair is a woman's crowning beauty, as I said in the Shiur, and of course, obviously, and quoted the Medrash quoted by the Mesilas Yesharim at the beginning, when Hashem created the first woman, Chava, he himself prepared her hair to be as beautiful as possible when he brought her to Adam, so he would be attracted to her. And then I said, and a woman's beauty is hardly enhanced if she's bald, something along those lines. Not did I know that the woman sitting in the front row wearing a wig had just finished chemotherapy and was completely bald underneath the wig. Well, the people in the show did. But fortunately for me, she started to laugh. She had a great sense of humor. And I think that got me off the hook. But otherwise, the poor person might have upset her greatly. But could I have known? Don't really think so. I don't think it's such a controversial thing to say. Inevitably, you can hurt somebody's feelings. But the question is, did you mean to? Or could you or should you have known not to? And that's something to think about. People's feelings are important. And I mentioned before that my little book for big worries has helped thousands of people. There's 2 chapters in there about being careful what you say. Say the right words, you can build somebody up and save their life. Say the wrong words and you can kill them or cause their life to end more quickly. And it's something, of course, we all do. And I'm not saying I've not been guilty of that myself. It's something to avoid, but certainly to do intentionally. Well, that's what it's talking about here. A ger, a yosem, almona have a particular sensitivity. You have to be very careful. But for an almona and a yosem, Hashem will hear the double anguish. And there's a connection there to the ger as well. The most vulnerable then need to be treated with the most sensitivity. But all people, including a Grusha, a divorcee, they certainly have to be treated with sensitivity as well. I should look forward to seeing you all again next week for our next Shiur with the Parshas of the Alshich College. Good shows.